Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Reynolds, the Chancellor with the Archdiocese of Louisville. Welcome to our podcast series, What's New in ArchLou. This show highlights the people and ministries of the Archdiocese, the Catholic Church in Central Kentucky. Join us each month as we welcome new guests to discuss what's new in the Archdiocese, events and activities taking place. We invite you to get involved as you deepen your own engagement with your Catholic faith. This program is brought to you by the ArchLou Podcast Network. We have a great show again today. We're really excited about this. We welcome Karl Schmitt Jr., who just recently retired as President and CEO of the Louisville Sports Commission. In that role, Karl contributed greatly to athletics in the community and to youth sports. We know Karl from other places, though, and many of you, our listeners, would as well. He served as senior management over at Churchill Downs for 20 years as sports information director, and at the University of Miami in the 1980s. He was a teacher and football coach at Bishop David High School, now Holy Cross. Karl and his wife, Melinda, have 2 sons and are members of Holy Trinity Parish. Now, Karl, before we get into our content of our topic today, would you take a few more minutes to introduce yourself to us and tell us more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I grew up in the West End, one of 10 kids, number 8 out of 10, 6 sisters and 3 brothers. Grew up in the 50s and 60s during that amazing period after World War II when all those kids and baby boomers, and there was just a lot of activity, a lot of things going on. The other remarkable thing during that period was a thing called white flight, where there were black families started moving into areas in the West End. A lot of white families left. So that was a big impact on my life. I went to Christ King Elementary School. We had 101 kids in our first grade class, and we had 26 in our 8th grade class. So it was a massive amount of change. Graduated from Flagey High School in 1971. Went to Morehead State University, played football. Came back to Louisville, as you mentioned, coached at Bishop David. Thought I wanted to be a college coach, went back to Morehead as a grad assistant coach, decided to do a career change, ended up at the University of Miami in the athletic department, then came back to, met my wife in Miami. She was a swimmer at the University of Miami. She was in that first wave of Title IX scholarship athletes, swam at Plantation here in Louisville. We came back to Louisville to raise our family.
Very good. You know, the Schmitt family has a long connections with many, many things in this community. I bet you could tell a lot of stories.
Well, when you have 9 siblings and your father's career is sports, you all get involved in sports. We were officials. We helped take care of the fields, line fields. We held the chains during football games. My mom was involved in it as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of great stories and big influence on our family.
Very good. As you know, our parish communities have a long tradition of youth sports, and we want to talk about the relationship between sports and the church, because it's significant, and there's lots of examples about that, and we hear that at the college level. But here in Louisville, it's unique because we focus a great deal on the elementary level, the smaller children, in something that we refer to as the Catholic School Athletic Association, which I believe is one of the largest or the largest of its kind in the country. Tell us what's unique about CSAA.
Well, it's really participation-based.
Okay.
It encourages participation. And if you look at how it's set up in terms of the leagues and the structure and everything, they encourage all kids an opportunity to play. In basketball, they have number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 teams as far down the list in terms of your competition level as your school has kids to play. So the whole thing was based on participation. And it was the forerunner of it was St. X High School, the Zavarian Brothers doing it back in the 20s. And then there was a intramural program that was run by lay people. And then the priests took it up from there in 1946, they formed the CSAA, which is under the auspices of the Archdiocese. That was run by priests for about 5 years. And then a priest named Father Martin decided that maybe we need someone besides priests. We need to focus on our kids and our schools. And they hired a lay director, executive director in 1951. That was my father.
Karl Schmitt Sr. He was the first lay director, as you said, in 1951, and he served as executive director for 33 years until his retirement in 1984. As you said, for the 70-plus years, CSAA has organized and managed Catholic parish elementary schools for tens of thousands of young people. I like that you talked about engagement and involvement and participation. Both of my children played there. They're both in their 30s now, but both of mine back in their day played there. And I'd get in trouble. Well, I'll tell just a brief part of the story. My daughter was not particularly apt at basketball. But before she finished her fourth grade program, they made sure they designed a play so she could get a basket. And she never played after that, but she could tell you stories about that play all these years later. And that reminds me what CSAA is about.
Well, that's right. And if you look at it from the very beginning, there were teams, and when they first started, it was basketball for boys, football for boys, and they had girls playing softball from the very beginning. And it was also it was inclusionary. Black teams from the black parishes were playing football. They were running track at the very beginning. And my family, I know you asked me one time about my mom. My mom was very involved from the beginning. They had these football leagues, and believe it or not, my mother washed the uniforms of all the teams.
My goodness.
And that's, with all these kids running around. And if you think about my mom, she was kind of like a coach's wife, right? So if you've ever known a coach at the high school or college or professional level, it's a very dedicated profession. You're gone a lot, and the spouse has to really, whether it's a male or female, the spouse has to be of a certain mindset that my spouse is going to be gone a lot, and my dad was gone a lot. There's an organization part of the CSAA that's 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, but they don't play many games during that time. They play games in the evenings and on weekends, so you're gone a lot. So our whole family is involved, and the CSAA from the very beginning was all about kids having a chance to play. Now, don't get me wrong, it was very competitive. They had championships, the Toy Bowl, the basketball championships are big, but it really was set up so more kids could play.
You quickly said there two things. One is that there was girls, young women engaged in the earliest days, and it was inclusive of black students. That's pretty unique in that era.
It is. Well, you had the KHSAA that didn't have girls' sports until 20 years later. The NCAA didn't start doing championships until the early 70s. So this was light years ahead. You had black students playing against white students, which is something that didn't happen in this part of the country really until the late 60s. So because of the priests and the mindset of the priests and the whole infrastructure, it was inclusionary from the beginning. Girls added softball in 63. They added basketball in the late 50s. The number 2 teams and on down were added in the 60s. And I found a stat that in 1963, there were 11,000 kids in the Catholic grade schools that were participating in the CSA sports.
11,000. My goodness. That's historic for sure. Okay, let's go back to your dad a little bit because he's legendary. Do you know why he what got him involved in sports? I know it got involved in CSAA, that's part of it, but he liked sports before that.
Yeah, so he was a football player at St. X, and he played what they called semi-pro football for a team called the Louisville Tanks. He was a coach. He coached a lot of girls' teams and a lot of women's. He coached a women's fast-pitch softball team back in the 30s and 40s. It was legendary in Louisville. He was an official, a football, basketball, baseball official. And he believed in what the data is telling us today, that sports helps improve kids' lives. If you participate in sports, and really the data is telling us if you participate in any extracurricular activity, you're a better student, you're better adjusted, you get along with your classmates better. But he believed in sports, and he believed that sports did that, and he believed in youth sports. And he was one of those volunteers that helped those that precursor of the CSA run in the 30s and 40s.
Okay, now you played sports yourself, and then you coached and taught at Bishop David for a short while. Tell me about, was that ingrown in the family, or did you develop some of your own liking because of other experiences?
Yeah, so all of us, all 10 of the siblings were exposed to sports.
Yeah.
Because that was our dad's job. I mean, like.
And your mom was doing the laundry.
My mom was doing the laundry. And think about it, the technology today, right? So if it snows and you're trying to figure out if the basketball games are on or off, You go to a website, or you're on a text line. You know what you did in 1962?
Call your dad.
You called the Schmitt family house. Okay. So we were instructed, we were taught how to answer the phone. Schmitt residents, are the games on or off? The games are off today, you know. And so we were exposed to it. So you had every opportunity to be involved in sports if you wanted to. Many of my siblings went on to do things in sports. My oldest brother, Paul, was a highest level college football official. My brothers played. My sisters played. They officiated. I'm the only one that spent the entire my entire 43-year professional career was in sports. And a lot of that was because of the opportunity that I had. And also, I used to watch my dad. I was at that age where my mom, tried to get rid of me a little bit. I would go to the office with my dad, and I would just watch the way he operated. And one thing that stood out about him was it was all about the kids. It wasn't about the coaches. It wasn't about the parents. It was about the kids, and it was about making it right for the kids.
That's a great image. I never met your dad, but the understanding of his place in the community is pretty sacred, actually.
Well, the other thing that people would tell me about my father, and I saw this, but it was always good to hear it from third parties, was that he ruled with an iron fist to a certain degree. The buck stopped with him. He made the decisions. Now, he had an oversight group, a board of priests, and he couldn't just do what he wanted. But when it came to the day-to-day operation of the CSAA, it all came to him. And if there was a problem with a coach, if there was a problem with an official, if there was a problem with a fan, my father made the decisions, and the decisions were final. And as I mentioned before, all those decisions were based around what was the best thing for the kids.
Yeah. You talk about the role of young people being central focuses, but talk to me a little bit about the role of youth sports within our Catholic community. That obviously people talk about high school because so many big athletic events do with high schools, and in this city, university and colleges. But when you talk about youth sports, it quickly turns to CSAA. So can you tell me about the contributions or the connection of youth sports to the Catholic Church?
Yeah, there's a couple things that stand out. Number one, it's faith-based, right? So it's really faith-based, and it's all about doing things a certain way because that's how our faith teaches us that we need to do things. And that starts with the organization of the leagues, the coaches, the players, and there's an expectation level there of the fans as well. It doesn't always happen. Yeah. There's always, but at the end of the day, that faith base carries through in terms of how coaches coach, how players play, how the leagues are run. And one of the great things about sports that we've learned now, and I've mentioned that the data is telling us, that it teaches kids how to lose and recover. And that's a big part of our faith as well, right?
Yes.
We're not perfect. We're always going to make mistakes. You have to learn from your mistakes, the contrition. And then the other part about the CSA, I don't think that probably should be mentioned. It is a pretty good feeder system for the high school sports programs.
Sure.
If you look at girls volleyball in Kentucky, particularly in Louisville, at the girls' Catholic high schools, as good as any in the country, and that has had its origins with the CSAA.
Is that right? Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the godfather of volleyball in Kentucky is a guy named Ron Cordes.
Yeah.
Do you know where he coached before he coached at Assumption? Right across the parking lot.
St. Raphael?
St. Raphael. Ah. And he saw there was an opening at Assumption, and he went there. But that opportunity to train kids, and I'm not just talking necessarily about the competitive side, but some of it's about that life balance. How to play on the team and make sure your academics are good, make sure that your faith-based values are in order, and that balance part of it that we learn when we're playing on teams carries through in our life.
But of course, with the good comes challenges. Can you name some challenges that youth sports has faced in the past and in the present, perhaps?
Yeah, I think most of it centers around, unfortunately, around parents and sometimes around coaches. For the most part, coaches are in it for all the right reasons. You'll come up with some coaches that think that, fourth grade basketball is the NBA Finals, and obviously it's not. And with parents, in my experience and watching and being a parent, now a grandparent, that you have to let kids develop on their own. You can't make them be something they're not going to be. You don't want to play football vicariously through your son or volleyball through your daughter. And I'll give you two quick examples. My younger son, Jesse, when he was a freshman at Trinity, he was a center and a long snapper. I was a long snapper. I taught my two sons how to long snap. Jesse did not get 1 second of long snapping for Trinity's freshman football team. And he ended up as a long snapper for Purdue and had 2 opportunities to play in the NFL. He just wasn't ready yet. And so my grandson played on a little soccer deal, 4 years old. First game he didn't play. The second game they only played because they told him you can't have snacks unless you play. The third game he got in and a goal, I think a ball bounced off his foot and went in the goal. In the fifth game, he scored 5 goals. So you just have to let kids experience it and develop on their own, and you also have to let them follow their passion. Not your passion, but their passion. That's
a voice of great experience and reason there. Is that the advice you'd give to other parents?
Sure. I mean, you certainly exposing them to a lot of things. The other thing I would say is give them an opportunity to play a lot of different sports. One of the knocks on youth sports today is that we're so focused on single sport activity. If a kid shows some promise in basketball, he's playing basketball year-round, doesn't have an opportunity to play any other sports. And that's hard because there's some demands and requirements from this youth travel and moving up. But I would say give them as many chances and opportunities and let them follow their passion.
Very good. Very good. Now, I can think of a few myself, but you're going to be better at this than I am. Can you talk about a few of the CSAA alums who become significant sports heroes?
Yeah, well, I think the first 3 that you'd have to mention would be the 2 guys that were classmates at Flagey High School and played in the early days of the CSAA, and that would be Howard Schnellenberger and Paul Horning. I mean, Paul Horning's in every football Hall of Fame there is. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. He played on NFL championships teams. He was on the first Super Bowl team. Howard Schnellenberger, national championships, Super Bowl champions. And then Mary T. Maher. How about Mary T. Maher, when she was still a student at Holy Trinity, set a world record in a butterfly? Yeah, still a student at Holy Trinity Elementary School. And then, what we like to call the first family of football in Louisville, the Brahms. And Jeff, now the head coach at the University of Louisville, and did a remarkable job at Purdue, and just countless other people that have gone on into professional careers, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and a lot of that because of their training and their experiences playing CSA sports.
When you think about some of those, I don't know, heroic figures, I know your dad would say it's about all the kids. I can hear you. What's the lesson we can take around this tension between you got to win and be good versus you got to be inclusion? You've focused on that, but I want to stay there a little bit longer.
Yeah. So I think my dad's favorite activity, sports activity, the CSAA, was the track meet.
Tell me why.
Well, because it was the epitome of being inclusionary, right? You could, I can remember 50 heats of the girls' 60-yard dash, and all these football officials and basketball officials that worked, and my dad was also the assignment secretary for the Kentucky football officials in Jefferson County, and all those football officials, they had to come work the CSA, volunteer work. And I can remember lining up 50 and 60 heats, and we had 8 lanes. They run at Flagey, the West meet, and the East meet they would run at St. Pius, and then they'd have the championship at St. Pius. And they had 8 lanes in each of those, and every child in every lane got a ribbon. Now, there's those people out there that are saying, the trophy deal and all that, but let me tell you, just looking in the eyes of those little girls and little boys and we made up colors of ribbons. You had red, white, and blue, and then green and pink and chartreuse, and everybody got a ribbon, and it meant something to them. You could see the feeling of accomplishment. I didn't win my heat. I didn't even come close, but I finished. I participated. I had the guts to get out there on the track and line up with 7 other people and run straight down that lane and finish. And as I mentioned before, the data is telling us now that participation, and it doesn't matter what level you participate in and what your extracurricular activity in, it just helps young people deal with life as they're going through all those things that they have, whether it's, all those. It's tough, right?
Yeah,
it's tough.
Sure.
It was tough back in those days. It's tough today growing up, and you're looking for camaraderie and spirit and being a part of something, and sports does that for us.
I noticed last couple months back when Denny Crum passed away, and one of the things that happened in the city, same thing with Muhammad Ali's death, people, because of the men they were, but also the connection to sports, teammates, people they were coached by, sports figures from around the world paid attention to both those. But Denny Crum in particular, his teams from all those years gathered again. That's as strong as any alumni association.
Sports is powerful.
Yeah.
It is powerful. It has that way of bringing people together. And I'll say this again. The notion of being able to recover from losing is an important lesson in life. And we don't get that a lot. A knock on parents today is where they call them the helicopter parents or whatever they call them, where they hover and, protect kids. When you play on a sports team, you're not protected from anything. You're out there. The fans are looking at you. There's a set of rules. You have teammates that are relying on you. Or you could be playing an individual sport like tennis or golf, where it's just you and the golf ball and the club. And so those lessons of being able to deal with that and deal with that on both sides, whether you're at the high or the low, is important. And again, with the CSA, I think you bring it back to being faith-based, and you add all those things together. It's really very powerful.
I love that. Recover from losing. What a great life lesson. It could be a whole theme in of itself. Karl, you are a humble man, and I say that because I know you well enough while you're a sports person, liked your share of winning, I'm sure, but I also know as a person, as you interact with you don't start with you. But I don't want to not have a few minutes on our show today to talk with you about you. So, Louisville Sports Commission. Tell me about that, because that has really impacted this city, I believe.
Yeah, so the Sports Commission was formed about 25 years ago, really by the hospitality industry. And as youth sports was a growing industry in our country, the Louisville hospitality industry wanted to make sure that we, as a community, were getting our share of events that came to our community that filled up hotel rooms, heads and beds, as we call it in the industry. So when I left Churchill Downs after 20 years and was looking for my next career stop, I had an opportunity to go to the Sports Commission. I had no idea what I was doing or what the organization really did. Fortunately, there was a terrific staff and a young fellow named Greg Fonte, who's since taken my place, who's a St. Raphael guy. His mom actually taught at St. Raphael for a long time. But Greg taught me what the industry was like, and as we were moving through trying to bring more events to town and more heads and beds, I was at a think tank session with my peers of Sports Commission CEOs, and we were doing this one session, and there was one simple question. What are you doing to improve the quality of life in your community with the organization that you oversee besides heads and beds?
So, I can't wait.
So it's a good question, right? So
Yeah.
I came back to our team and said, so what's the deal? And so what we did, we looked internally and tried to determine what our assets were, and looked externally to determine what the needs are in the community. And one that upon which we alit is health and wellness. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that people that participate in sports are generally healthier because they exercise on a regular basis. And the data is telling us now that if you exercise on a regular basis, you're happier, healthier, you're more productive, you live longer, just all those great things. And so we at the Sports Commission decided, well, we have this nexus with people who are healthier because they are involved in sports. What can we do? So we set up a program at the Sports Commission called Louisville Active, and under Louisville Active we have several programs, and the one that I'll focus on is called Sports Fund.
Sports Fund?
Fund, and it's fun with a parens around the D, so
Okay.
Make it fun. And through the generosity of a local philanthropist, low six-figure guarantee, the Sports Commission has been able to make grants to bring sports, recreational level competitive sports, to underserved neighborhoods in our community. This will be the second, I guess this is the second, just did the second year of girls volleyball in the West End. There really is no girls volleyball in the West End in terms of active leagues. So we have set up a league. We went to Ron Cordes and said, can you help? He said, absolutely. Send us some teachers. We had a gym in Portland, a guy that knew the neighborhood. We had 56 girls playing volleyball in the West End from ages like 10 to 13.
Very good.
And we've done the same thing in football. We've done it in fencing. We've done it in soccer. We've worked very closely with Metro Parks for soccer and swimming. And that, of all the things that I've ever been involved in my 43 years in sports, that opportunity to take recreational but competitive level sports to underserved neighborhoods, and the beauty of it is we're doing it in the neighborhoods where the kids live.
You know, you were information person at university level, at Churchill Downs, working the Sports Commission, but you keep going back to talking about the kids.
Yeah, well, you know, it's really our lifeblood, right?
Yes.
and those of us who believe, like my father did, like as I mentioned, the data is proving today, that sports can be a great enhancer for our life to teach us so many life lessons. I tell you, one of the things I did in my career, because I had a lot of people that were very kind and generous to me, I always would meet with young people who were interested in a career in sports.
Yeah.
And I'd look at their resume and we'd talk about, and I'd divide it into 3 buckets. Let's talk about you, let's talk about the marketplace out there, and then let's talk about where you want to go and job opportunities. And what I have found in talking to employers, that if you have on your resume that you played sports at any level, employers will take a look at it. If you played at the high school level, even more so. If you played at the college level, because of all those values that sports teaches us. And so that's a real world opportunity for kids that play sports that means something to them when they go into their careers.
You see it in some of even the big sport events like the Derby Festival mini marathons and marathons, all ages and all physical ability, all mixed together. It goes back to the track meet you're talking about.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And it also goes back to that notion of the number 2 teams in basketball.
Yeah.
And that was a breakthrough. And I remember just kind of listening, and there was a lot of dialogue and discussion about, you know, why should we do this? Does this make sense? And at the end of the day, it was really about giving more kids a chance to participate. You take a kid in the 6th grade and another kid in the 6th grade, and they may not be at the same developmental level. And why not let the young person, boy and girl, who's at the lesser developmental level, have an opportunity to compete, particularly against people at their own level?
Yeah.
So those number 2 and number 3, and I don't even know what they call them now, the C, D, or whatever they call them. I think they call them 1, 2, and 3. The beauty, you go out and watch them, and they're playing against kids of their own level. I use my younger son again. He was on the C team for 3 years. Guess what? In the 8th grade, he was on the A team.
Yeah.
It all started to come together for him because he had the opportunity to compete on a level set when he was younger.
I think they call it a farm system in the big leagues.
Yeah, it is that, but it's also a recognition of how kids develop. And that's, again, back to the message to parents, right? You know, and your kids just, you know, they don't start crawling at the same age. They don't start walking at the same age. They don't start talking at the same age. Why is that we would think they would start hitting a baseball the same way at the same age? It just doesn't happen.
Karl, from all your experience, what can you tell us we ought to be really attentive to as Catholic Church, as Catholic schools in this community, when we ask the question about the place of sports? What do we need to really remember here?
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that it's about the kids and making sure that there are opportunities. And this is an odd one, Brian, but you know, when you have sports, particularly organized sports, there's a lot of components to it, right? There's the players and the teams and the coaches and the infrastructure of the league, but there's also officials. And we have set up a mindset right now in our country where kids do not want to officiate any sport because of parents, because of what happens to parents in the stands. I just saw another video the other day of some father coming after I think it was a basketball official. And you can't have good quality competitive sports unless you have good officiating.
Yeah.
kids don't want to do it anymore because they don't want to deal with the grief. So I would say, let's all take a breath and relax a little bit. And this is competitive, but it's at an elementary school level. And let's let everybody have a good experience.
That's a good lesson. That's a good takeaway. You know, you and your family are great models of service. I want to thank you on behalf of this local archdiocese, this community. You've lived your faith in the world of the church, but the world of the schools, but the world of sports has been, I guess, where your fingerprints are, and the heritage. I thank God for your mom and dad, who not only raised your great family, but it's showing up in your next generations. That's a great gift, Karl.
Well, thank you. There's a lot of the Schmitt family prints on it, but there's a lot of other people too. There were a lot of volunteers and all the great coaches and the parents and priests and principals who all have been part of this. It's been a labor of love for our family, but it's also been something that's been very rewarding, I think, for this community, because the community really built this, and the community has sustained this.
Well, congratulations on your retirement and for your many years of service. I suspect it's still going on behind the scenes as you're coaching your grandkids now. And I don't know if you have a long snapper coming up in the tradition, but there could be someday. And thanks to our viewers and our listeners for joining us for this month's episode of What's New in ArchLou. And please tune in again next month for our next show.